All right. Welcome, everyone, to the quarterly update of the business of AI. I love seeing all the familiar people from previous courses. We always have other new people joining us who weren't here before, so I'm going to quickly let everyone know what to expect. And overall, as always, run through all the updates. As AI always does, there are so many new things happening in the last 3 months. I think compounded with the fact that we have a new administration in the US over the last 3 months that has its own take on technology generally, with the fact that some nations have evolved in their approach to AI, and some countries like China and India have ramped up their efforts. We're going to have a lot of discussion about geopolitics today and some of the changes. I'm going to quickly tell you what's ahead, but start with two videos that I thought would be charming to everyone. This video is one of the things that I'm going to mention later, as in Hollywood got big in AI. What you see here is AI who took children's pictures and made them into movies. So the children basically drew what they think of as a duck or as a bird or as a dog, and AI took those pictures and made them into cars, animals, objects.
You are still on the first slide.
Oh, you don't see the next slide? You don't see the video?
Nope, still the intro slide.
Oh. You guys see the computers now, Hannah?
Nope, still the intro slide.
Oh no. So is it working now?
Now we can see yes.
But you see kind of everything. You don't see my video.
Correct.
Let me try again. This is, I didn't see it coming. Let's make desktop one. I'm gonna stop share. I'm gonna try to share desktop one. Is it now showing a video?
Yes.
Is the video, Anna?
Yep, video now.
Let's start over. What you see here is a cartoon from kids and how AI turned that into videos. This was the first of two videos that I thought would be kind of good way to introduce the advances in AI over the last 3 months. This one talks about how technology in the space of graphics ramped up and became extremely incrementally advantageous to people who use that. What used to take hours and millions of dollars of production to put the camera in the right angle, to make sure that you wait for the lighting to be in the perfect space, to make sure that you cut perfectly with the editor to the CGI and so on, has now become a prompt that you put and immediately changes everything. This is very kind of well noticed by the graphic industry, the marketing industry, the media world, and namely Hollywood. So this was one. The other buzzword of the last 3 months that most companies are talking about right now is agents. In January 20, the day that President Trump took office, was also the day that OpenAI announced agents as this big tool that they're going to advocate for in 2025. It took some time for all companies to now kind of climb on board of this idea. And agents are these AI tools that are asynchronous. Instead of like asking a question and getting a prompt back, you ask a question and the agent takes this question and runs with it. And it keeps processing it in the background for as long as it takes, reading emails, looking at calendars, doing tasks for you. Agents are the buzzword of the last quarter in the space of AI. And one video that I thought speaks for the power of agents is one that I saw on the internet a few weeks ago, where you had a person, I think, I forget, I'm going to say in a second, calling a travel agent to get, I think, a ticket booked, or I think that this is what it is. And he speaks to the agent on the other side and asks questions. And at some point, it becomes clear that the person he's talking to on the other side isn't a human, but a machine. And he says, "Are you a machine?" And the entity says, "Yes, I'm a machine. I'm an agent." And the person who called says, "Oh, I'm an agent too." and immediately they say, how about we move to speak gibberish link, they call it gibber link, rather than English, and they start talking a different language to each other. I'm going to show you the video. I think it's pretty powerful. And there it is. You see how the two of them start speaking in some gibberish code that no one understands, which the machine can translate to text in English, and that's how they do the communication. So I think that if we ever kind of thought about a creepy idea that AI could start speaking its own language and do things behind us, there is the first canary in the coal mine of this happening. So today, May 14, we're going to talk about the business and new tools in the world of AI, about new policies and regulations that came up, some research. I'll tell you who I think are the winners and losers of the last 3 months in the space of AI. We look at the predictions from the last 3 months, how well we did. Spoiler, pretty good. And I'll show you the predictions we have for the next 3 months in the space of AI. And then we're going to have Max Sills, Counsel for Midjourney and expert in AI legal, tell us about where he thinks this is going. Okay, so part one, business and tools. I'm going to go, as always, quickly on the variety of companies that offer remarkable tools that came up recently. So Anthropic is our first incoming tool. They announced a few weeks ago Claude upgrade to max subscribers. Those are the highest tier of subscribers. And this one can talk to other apps, authenticate itself. So you can actually give Claude a task that involves getting access to other websites with username and passwords, doing things that are behind walls, and it will do it for you. So you basically give all your passwords to Claude and you say, Claude, I want you occasionally to go to this website and download all the content and summarize it for me and give it to me. I want you to go to my bank account, pay my bills, and tell me how much you paid. Essentially, it does tasks as an agent with your username and passwords. This spearheaded Anthropic's performance in all the things related to agents. And according to all the benchmarks that people use, they are now on the lead when it comes to innovation in AI. It used to be forever OpenAI that was the lead, and that's the first time that they took the lead in terms of coming up with new things that the world is following after, rather than they are the second to join. They also released, like everyone else, their own deep research tool. If you remember, deep research are the tools that AI companies charge a lot more. OpenAI charges $20,000 for subscription for this tool that allows you to actually ask questions that are much more sophisticated, that involve a chain of thoughts, like solve problem one, and then based on the answer to problem one, build problem two, and then problem three, and really solve problems. OpenAI was the first to launch that, and now Anthropic has their own. OpenAI had its moment of decline also in the last quarter, where for the first time they had to roll back a release of a product. If you remember, Microsoft had their moment years ago when they released a version of an AI on Twitter, and then it could interact with you. It quickly became very, very sexist, misogynist, and within 24 hours they took it down. Gemini from Google had the same moment, only reverse, when they at some point released their LLM, and it turned out to be very woke, as in if you ask it to make a picture of the founding fathers of the US, it will make sure that there's enough women, enough men, Asian, children. It kind of tried to make it very, very woke when everything he asked was kind of trying to not be correct, but just cater, and this got a lot of bad press on the other side. OpenAI managed to kind of stay in their lane and not have any problem. And just a few weeks ago, early in April, they released a version of GPT-4o that they fine-tuned to be more enthusiastic. And it started to be noticed by people. They started to comment on that, and before long, they realized that I guess there was some mistake in the fine-tuning, and they took it back. They rolled it back to an older version. It basically, for every question you ask, said, this is such a deep insight. You're so smart. Even if you ask it something very, very silly, it would say, like, how much is 2 plus 2? I'm so grateful for this question. This is a profound question. I can clearly see this was kind of a ridicule version of how nice it could be. And they indeed rolled it back afterwards. It's the first time that they encountered this experience. Also, on the positive side, they released the image generation tool recently, and it's now accessed through the API. You can do not just classic tasks like ask it to make a picture for you and get the picture. This is DALL-E or Midjourney Classic, but it can also work and iterate over existing picture. So you can say, make me a picture. No, I like this one, but just add a mustache. And instead of starting over and making a new picture, it can edit existing pictures. So you can add features. You can change, say, the same picture just with glasses, the same picture but less blue. This is seemingly a kind of next step of the technology of image generation, but it's a whole different algorithm. It's a much harder algorithm. It's easier for AI agents to take a prompt and turn it into a picture. It's really, really hard to take a picture and change that. You have to understand the content. It's much harder, and they now have their own version. It also allows you to clean images, so you can take a picture and make it, say, different kind of contrasts, fix all kinds of like skin damages. Basically, it helps a lot industries that rely on print imagery, like the media industry, the photo industry, to do a better job in their tasks. And it's also allowing you to put metadata. So you can kind of create a picture, but not just the picture, also the background data. So it tells you what's the resolution and what are the sources of the things that were used to create the content. So a lot of things that are beyond just the picture itself that is useful if you look at things like the IP of the image and things like this. They right now charge 2 cents for low quality images and 19 cents for high quality images. They can make images up to 2K, which is very high quality. If you look at the numbers, it becomes a increasingly kind of expense. So if you're an industry that makes, say, 5 pictures a day using this thing, it's $1 for 5 pictures. You can easily get to a kind of expenses that are not insignificant for organizations that use it very much more. They also had a bit of bad press in this regard when they did the kind of Amazon playbook lately of looking at the use cases that companies have and trying to offer a product. If you remember, Amazon has this thing where if you list a product on Amazon and Amazon sees that this product is doing really, really well, at some point they're going to offer Amazon Basic, which is this same product for a cheaper price, owned by Amazon and getting higher in the search before your product. Vendors have a lot of challenges between themselves and Amazon on how do you make sure that your IP isn't becoming Amazon IP. OpenAI, as one of the leading vendors in space of AI, sees a lot of people building GPTs on top of OpenAI and using that. And as they see that one is very popular, they're now beginning to offer their own version of that. So people accuse them of being the Amazon of AI. This is new. We'll see how it plays out. But somewhat good news for OpenAI on the image space, somewhat bad news on both how they launched a new product and how they're being seen now as not just the innovators and the geniuses, but also as some nefarious users. Still in the space of image, Adobe released a new image model 4 and 4 Ultra. It too creates a 2K resolution images, and it also can render scenes, and it has all kinds of tools that are catered towards the print industry. You can do mood boards. You can say, here's a product, create all kinds of mood boards for it, and it knows what mood boards are and knows to create them. And it's very, very good in using human interaction to make images. So you can take a picture and you can highlight with their tools the parts that you want to change, and it changes that. Rather than make a new picture with prompts, you can actually use tools to perfect the prompts and change them. So human and machine here work together. Very, very powerful. They also added on the legal side 2 things that are relevant. They announced that all the training data they used is on non-copyrighted models. So if you use anything that was created by them, you're pretty much clean when it comes to using that in any commercial application. You can be guaranteed that you won't be sued, and they offer to identify all the users of this tool by saying basically, if you use Adobe, whatever comes out of that is for you to use, which is, I think Max can tell us later, a useful thing in the space of this image. XAI, the last company to join the AI race by Elon Musk has now caught up. They released feature by feature a mapping of all the features that Anthropic and OpenAI have with their own models. They're trying to suggest that they have some advantages on how it treats data, namely because they have data from X as their training data, which OpenAI and Anthropic don't have, for example. So they say we have new data, and therefore we speak a little bit more colloquially, a little bit like more naturally. We understand politics better than everyone else. But mostly what you should know is XAI now has for every feature, image generation, video generation, code generation, for everything that you can do with the previous existing models. They can do now XAI in the same level of performance. They also launched something they call Grok Vision, which is again a tool that they think would be useful B2B for a lot of people in marketing and communication. It allows you to basically point at an item and ask a question about it. So you take a picture and you see, hey, this shirt that Moran's wear, can you find on the internet who is the vendor that made this shirt? Can you see if you can make me a shirt like this? And it kind of knows how to look at pictures and select items and ask question about them. It kind of takes over the business of Pinterest, of other companies that are all in the realm of like take content and like allow us to see sub-contents. You can also search in voice mode using Grok, and you can also interact with multi-languages. So you can actually speak to it in, say, Portuguese and get answers in English, or you can say, I'm going to speak to you in Portuguese and answer to me based on the internet learning in English, but turn it to Portuguese. So it kind of becomes a tool that would hopefully, in their mind, become a lot broader in languages that are beyond English. They created a subscription plan called Super Grok, $30 a month in parallel with all the competitors. That is now their way of kind of creating a B2C industry. They all have B2B with the API that everyone can interact with the API, but now they have something that they hope users will also benefit from. That's AI. Agents, I said, are the buzzwords of the jour. We don't see many use cases right now from companies that are kind of mapped as the ideal use case, but most companies, and I think that the many people who are here with us today, if you're working with a large company, you're probably right now thinking, how do I leverage that? So what was Reasoner last year and what was Chats a year and a half ago is now what most companies that I talk to are interested in, which is how do I think of AIs that take tasks in a company and do it for me. Going outside of the US, Baidu released Ernie X5 Turbo with a very big drop in their price. I think that this was the first canary in the coal mine to China trying to compete on business. So for a while, the US dominates the business world of AI, with China having some companies that emerge every now and then, namely DeepSeek was the kind of biggest story of 3 months ago, the Sputnik moment of AI. This was a big story. Now Baidu, as a competitor, has its own product, and whereas DeepSeek and many of the Chinese products were on par when it comes to performance, they had a hard time selling. So there were not a lot of businesses that Western businesses that would buy a Baidu AI or bid on a Baidu AI. It was mostly Anthropic, Mistral, OpenAI, Llama, Gemini. Those are the ones that got all the business. Now Baidu and other Chinese companies, we're going to say in a second, are trying to penetrate the business side by offering lower prices, perfect reasoning models, perfect English-speaking models. So this is a kind of potential interesting change in the business dynamics of AI. They time and again showed that their performance is very much aligned with that of the existing models in all kinds of benchmarks the Americans created, how well they solve math problems, how well they write text in certain different lengths, how well they address coding problem, and so on. So very kind of good job in all of those. Another company that is worth looking at is a company we call Thinking Machines Lab. Thinking Machines Lab is a company that was just formed weeks ago. It's May is, I think, still the launch date. So less than 2 weeks from now is actually the launch date. It was in the media for a little bit longer. It's a company run by Mira Murati. She was the CTO of OpenAI, and for one weekend, the CEO of OpenAI. She before that was at Tesla, a very talented woman in the space of AI, who some say had a very kind of different approach to OpenAI's leadership. She was seen when the entire kind of scandal of firing the CEO and then putting him back and firing the board happened over the course of a few weeks. She was regarded as the voice of sanity and voice of reason among all the different kind of constituents of this experience. She, a few months ago, left OpenAI, saying that she sees some challenges in how she views the company's efforts going. The rumors are that there was disalignment between her and the CEO on how fast AI should scale and how they should address all kinds of risk issues. She was on the side of slower and a little bit more careful, and supposedly Sam Altman was on the side of big and better and faster, kind of true to Silicon Valley style. They disagree. She left. For a few months, there was silence on what she's going to do. Everyone knew that she's raising money and trying to start a company, but it wasn't clear what it is. Now, 2 weeks ago, we learned that she raised $2 billion under a $10 billion valuation. Company is called Thinking Machines Lab. The lab part suggests that maybe it has to do not just with the product, but also with a research arm rather than just like a business. But from all the evidence that we have on how her predecessors started kind of research labs, they all end up having a product. She retained a full majority on the board of this company in multiple ways. There are some contingencies that says that no matter how the company is structured, she always has a majority. She also has most of the shares of the company. So she, I think, also learned a lesson from other stories on how you want to make sure that the CEO has a lot of power. And this is manifested by how she structured the company. She's recruiting remarkable talent. She now has some big names in AI who left OpenAI to other companies like Anthropic and SSI, and she got them to her company. It's yet to see what would be the product and how would they approach. We don't know much about that. There are only rumors, but this is another company to pay attention to, Thinking Machines Lab, that's new with us. Huawei is penetrating the NVIDIA space. So besides having a lot of software tools that are very known and mobile phones tools and things like this, they now announced the 9C chip and the different series, the 910B chips, the 910D, the 920C. Those are all types of chips that they announced. But the bottom line is they try to show that their performance parallels the H100 from NVIDIA. If you don't remember from the class, H100 is the leading GPU from NVIDIA. It's where the money is. It's the one that the US prohibits NVIDIA from selling to other countries, and there are all kinds of exports laws about that. It's what costs the majority of the money for AI companies. If they want to buy compute, they buy it from NVIDIA. They buy en masse, hundreds of thousands or millions, if you look at XAI, of those GPUs. By Huawei showing that they actually have a chip that is parallel performance, they kind of put companies like NVIDIA, AMD, Broadcom at note. And indeed, when they announced that, NVIDIA stock dropped 5%, AMD dropped 3%, Broadcom dropped 5%. So all those companies that were kind of monopolies for a while are starting to see competition. It also creates competition from different angle because Huawei presumably would not have the same export tools, whereas NVIDIA cannot sell some versions of the H100 to China, for example. They still sell the H200. I think I would put before, 16% of NVIDIA sales are from China, to whom they sell the H200, the 5 years ago version of the GPU. Now Huawei can basically sell to China a better version, so this will change the dynamics between countries. It's not just like a product thing, it actually changes a lot of geopolitics on that. They didn't ship it yet. They're going to start mass shipment next month. We'll see how it plays out, but for now, there's, for the first time, a big competitor to NVIDIA that offers the same product for cheaper price. Generally, looking at China, companies like ByteDance, Alibaba, Tencent, they are said to be stockpiling billions of dollars worth of chips. What was the impetus for that was that the Trump administration announced a few months ago that they're going to create export control rules on the H200. It says H20, but it's H200 chips. If you remember again, H100 is the best one. H100 is kind of number two. It's limited on how big the memory it has and how it basically can train, the size of the model that it can train. So it was announced that by the end of April, so 2 weeks ago, there's going to be export control restrictions on NVIDIA selling the H200 chips. And in true to game theory 101, they used the 3 months between the date was announced to the end of April to sell as many as possible. So they sold in the last 3 months many hundreds of thousands of the H200. As I said, the small companies, ByteDance, Alibaba, and Tencent in the space of AI are now amassing tons of those GPUs, preparing for what started 2 weeks ago, and presumably whether it changes or not, we don't know. They now have a lot of capacity of GPUs that they didn't have just weeks ago. Rumors that are coming in the space of AI are that XAI is trying to not just be kind of parallel to all its competitors, but actually beat them by 2026. And to do that, they just announced, or trying to announce, that they're going to build the data center that's going to be the biggest one in the world with 1 million GPUs. Right now, they already have the biggest one with only 100,000 GPUs, and this allowed them to become the kind of company that is on par with OpenAI and Anthropic. If they have 10 times more, they're going to be able to either train models almost every 2 weeks, or they're going to be able to train models that are much bigger on their size, and this might just give you much better performance. Again, to get to 1 million GPUs, they have to raise between 50 to 62 is the estimate $billion worth of GPUs to what they call Project Colossus. To give you a kind of a proportion, the US has $20 trillion economy. That this means that some percent of the US economy now, like an integer, not like a 0.00, but like 1% of the American economy already this year will be, of the GDP, sorry, will be allocated to AI. If this is how the race is going to go, it means that in the next 5 years, we might have a percent of the American economy all going to one industry, to 7 companies, and essentially to one particular sub-industry, which is buying compute. This, of course, has a lot of impact on businesses as a global thing, but also an economy when it comes to climate. I think I gave you in some of the classes that I spoke recently the estimates on the fact that if the projections go the way they are, then by 2030, between 15 and 20% of the US energy is going to be allocated purely to data centers by those 7 AI companies. This was before those numbers emerged. So right now we're looking at an even higher allocation of energy that will go solely to operate AI. It's unprecedented. It also means that industries that benefit from having access to energy would be able to start selling it. So countries like India, China, Bhutan, that have a lot of access to different style of energy, are starting to see that. It's not different, and I'm going to say it in the prediction. It's not different when it comes also to other countries in the Middle East. So President Trump is right now traveling in the Middle East. Some of the deals that are being discussed are deals that have to do with putting data centers in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, with the idea that they have access to different, of course, source of energy. It's much hotter and stable energy there, and they could become a provider of data access to the AI companies. This changes the geopolitics of the world because now the data sits in a different part of the world. It takes a little bit slower to actually transact in it, but also it means it's vulnerable to different types of cybersecurity issues. Those rumors are rumors about business, but I think they encapsulate questions about geopolitics beyond those. I wanted to talk about open source briefly and say that companies are also starting to think of as open source as another place they compete. Up to recently, essentially, Meta with its product Llama were the kind of only products out there that would be open source products that kind of companies used. OpenAI just released their own open source, competing with Llama, and now Alibaba has another one. And on the benchmarks that were visible, it beats the existing ones. So there it is. Alibaba now is the leader on an open source model. It again changes dynamic. If you remember, DeepSeek built on Llama. Many countries that don't have access to GPUs built on Llama. Now China has their own Llama, then they can do that. They use the same fine-tuning approach that DeepSeek used to train their model, which means that they built a lot of the kind of fine-tuning on asking other models questions and seeing what answers they give, and giving the question that they ask plus the answer as training data for their model. Another company to notice is a new one called Prime Intellect 2. Basically, it's a tiny startup company, but they introduced a new approach to doing language models that the world is seeing. Essentially, it's a distributed approach. So what they say is, instead of me acquiring many GPUs and doing the job, I'm going to create an algorithm. That's the algorithm they introduced, Intellect 2, that allows you to essentially run each part of the algorithm on different GPUs, getting everything kind of across all those servers, basically cryptocurrency, if you want, just for LLMs. The size of the models is 32 billion parameters, so it's much smaller than the 275 billion that OpenAI has and Anthropic has. So it's a tenth of the size. It can do less performance inferences than others. But again, they use the same algorithm that was used by DeepSeek, and they're starting to kind of create an alternative to the centralized models that exist out there. It also creates new type of knowledge and policies. So it's easy to regulate a company like OpenAI or Anthropic or Mistral by saying some things about what training data they're going to use and so on. It's nearly impossible to regulate a company that's spread over basically users as GPUs at homes and so on. So policymakers are starting to think how they're going to regulate this. And it also creates all kinds of logistical questions in terms of AI. So if I control everything and I have my data and I do the training, I can trust that everything I have was curated by me. If I rely on you bringing me data and he bringing me data and she bringing me data, how do I know that they're not trying to poison my data by intentionally giving me false data? So there's now new algorithms that essentially verify data before they use it for training. And if it doesn't match other training data, they reject it. It created basically a new algorithm for training that runs on those nodes in a special way. They announced the first iteration a month ago, thinking it's going to take 6 months to do the training, and it took several weeks to create a language model. If you remember, every time we spoke about in the class before the AI, we said it takes about 6 months to do a training of a 275 billion parameters LLM. Now we're seeing something that took only 3 weeks with a lot of people basically helping. Again, it's much smaller, but it's definitely a game changer on how it's done. Another open source I thought would be interesting to know is one called BitNet B158 2B4T model. It's a technical report of the world of OpenAI, and it essentially allows you to run AI models on open source native with much less parameters, only 20 billion parameters. So again, 10% the size of the existing models right now, but this one runs on GPUs and on CPUs. So now you have a way to run LLMs on your laptop or on a regular computer. Much smaller, but it performs as good as it says should be on par with bigger models that are 5 times bigger. So it's the first time we see a open source model that's trained on non-GPUs and still does really well. I'll mention in brief Meta's perception encoder, 2 billion parameter open source tool that they released that does video generation. So this is an open source tool, competes with Llama. Competes with Sora. Up to now, video was very expensive to run. I think that OpenAI had to dedicate entire kind of floor of servers just to do Sora, even though there's a lot less prompts to Sora than there are to ChatGPT, just because even with the fewer prompts, it takes a lot more compute than other things. Now Meta shows us that you can actually create an open source video generator. Again, it's a tool that we'll see how it plays out, but it definitely offers something. Policy and regulation, I'm gonna quickly run off that. I know that I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna go to Max in a few minutes. Company called Gladstone that really cares about policies released a really big report that suggests that every data center in the US is vulnerable to Chinese espionage. They sampled some of them, and they basically said that now there's evidence to espionage between China and the US in the data centers. So all the models that companies like OpenAI and XAI and Anthropic created are partly exposed to espionage from other countries, adversaries, and they put in the context of AI warfare. They said if tomorrow some country decides to use AI to create, say, ultimate biological weapons or nuclear bomb or some Manhattan Project style big thing with AI, the assumption is that it's going to be, unlike the Manhattan Project, could be done in secret and without anyone noticing. This will not be the case because China has access to it. There's also a preparedness framework that most companies have released over the last couple of months on basically what would they do if there are problems with AI. OpenAI released one, Anthropic released one. It was interesting to notice that OpenAI released all the things that you should worry about when it comes to AI, including explainability and sustainability, and then they put their persuasion by AI, and then they took it down. I don't know if it means that they don't think it's a risk or if they didn't want to worry about that because it's a bigger risk. I don't know, but it was kind of remarkable to see that they added it was public, and then they took it down. Anthropic, a month and a half ago in March, released theirs, their report on preparedness for AI attacks, and they listed all the prompts or percentage of prompts that Anthropic was exposed to that asked people to do bad things. And they basically listed that there's a growing number of people using Claude to try to influence a political campaign using Twitter, to see how to create bots that will create messages on TikTok, to scrape credentials of people, like elites they call them, but people basically who use Anthropic for some services that are proprietary, and others try to get their credentials. A lot of people trying to learn how to hack using Anthropic, basically teach me how to write bad codes and also mutate codes. If I have a code that say there's a for loop and you can stop me because you know how the code works, it's easy to use Anthropic to say, make me a code that does the same thing without the for loop. So instead of like counting from 1 to 10, it counts from 1 to 20 and then subtract 10. And then it essentially counted to 10, just the code now looks differently. And in that sense, there are more and more people using that. The most nefarious one that I found when I looked at the report is someone tried to use Anthropic to leverage security cameras to detect notes with passwords. So imagine that you have a bank and the bank has security cameras that point to the cashier, the teller of the bank. And at some point, the teller of the bank writes a note with a password or something on their end, and it's captured by the camera. Sometimes these cameras feed into bigger servers, and people try to use access to those cameras to see what's in the notes that were written and basically gain access to passwords. I think that Anthropic and OpenAI revealing that is just a sign that this is getting bigger and that also customers are more concerned about that. There's a note that I wrote on one thing that seems to be kind of a bigger concern, which is if you use those tools and you upload a bad code. So if you ask Anthropic, for instance, for code, if you say, write me a code that does something, you get a code. But if you say, here's a code that I wrote, can you make it better or can you help me fix it and so on, then it assumes that your question is kind of ground truth and try to help you with that. Basically, if you write bad code and you put it in the prompt, then you can actually use that to create security breaches in the code that comes back. So if I convince you to just try some model that I give you and have you just work on it and build it better, I basically make you have bad code in your server. This is an attack that I think was vector that I didn't know about before. I'll say something from 2 days ago that I think is relevant, and then I'm going to turn to Max. Saudi Arabia, in the context of Trump visit there, announced Humane with AI as the kind of center words, which is their own investment fund aimed at advancing LM in Arabic. There aren't that many right now, and basically the Middle East was far behind when it comes to technology. The only way they have access to technology is through their investment. So Saudi Arabia had a big stake in SoftBank, which is the biggest investor in OpenAI. This is how Saudi Arabia had access to AI, but now Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and basically many of the countries that are creating connections with the AI administration of Trump are building their own, and it's in part a bigger project where the US is trying to put some of their servers there. To speak to that, the US kind of took a side and they said that they're going to find China as their adversaries and Middle East as their allies. There's now a ban on the US employees in federal agencies using DeepSeek in any shape, way, or form. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn to Max. I think I'm going to quickly stop sharing so I can see Max with me. And I'm going to use this to have Max tell us, how can I put you on a full screen? Perfect. Okay, so I stole too much of your time, so I'm going to do a briefer introduction. Max Sills is the general counsel for Midjourney. He also owns an open advice agency as a legal counsel for startups in the space of AI. He's been in Google's open source legal team for a while. He's been in the legal space for quite some time, has seen numerous sides of the AI legal kind of experience. And I asked him to join us so he can tell us how does it look from the side of legal and what advice he can give people like our participants in how to do it right. Max, thank you for joining. This was a brief introduction. I didn't do everything, but I'll start right away. You've seen the world of AI inside out. You've seen all the battles about privacy and protection and IP and so on. We have with us dozens of leaders of companies, banks, financial services, consulting firms, Costco, Walmart, all kind of types of companies. Hollywood, I see also is here. What are the advice that you want leaders of the companies to know when it comes to legal in the space of AI?
Wow. That's a big question. Let's see. I think that it's tough. It really depends. I think first you have to identify the business model that you're trying to pursue with AI. and then you need to actually have a product. That's something bigger than a technology, but giving a user some kind of specific thing that they like to do with the technology. Because I think that having the specific product is what informs the legal strategy. So to give you an example, right now there is some societal fear around the idea that AI is going to come in and automation is going to come in and replace a bunch of jobs. And so this is a huge societal fear, and it's expressing itself in many different legal areas, specifically copyright. So copyright and fair use, which is a basis for all companies for a long time to take data of any type and train on it, make a transformative use of that data that didn't compete with the market for the original. It's now, there's these ideas that both from the administration and from Congress that it might get disturbed. That maybe like training wouldn't be, fair use wouldn't be a basis to train models. And so, but at that point, it really depends what position you advocate. It depends on the specific product and business model you have.
So wait for a second.
Yeah.
I'm a bank. I have no product that's facing customers, only internal, but I use one of the AI vendors like OpenAI, Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Copilot, and so on to help me write something internally. Okay, you're the lawyer from my organization that oversees my contract with Microsoft OpenAI. Give me advice, what to look for when I start to kind of look at them as a vendor that I should pay attention. I'll give you an example. Should I not let them train on my data? Should I not let them look at my prompts and do something? Like, what should I be concerned about as a user of the vendors, OpenAI?
Yeah. So the first problem is always going to be privacy. And so the first thing is make sure you execute a DPA, data protection agreement with the vendor. So like you wouldn't want to go into OpenAI and use that for stuff that could be internal to a bank, as an example, without executing a DPA. So the worst case scenario is that you are a regulated entity and you have employee data or your own client's data that gets fed into a prompt. So you have legal obligations. Privacy is the baseline, but regulated entities have even more obligations to keep that data safe. And in many cases, deleted upon the request of the user. You can't meet those obligations anymore if you're just sending it everywhere. But I think I would, at the same time, I know that business leaders are feeling extreme pressure. Sometimes I think irrational pressure to make everything AI, adopt AI, don't get left behind. So there, I think, like from a risk-based perspective, I would bucket it into prototype internal uses that are based on fake data, and then like production uses that are going to use real consumer data. And I think my advice would be to be as liberal as possible on prototype uses. We want to stand up prototypes as quickly as possible and to be extremely careful and thoughtful and slow about rolling out user-facing AI products that might implicate privacy or might create some kind of liability for the company. And it's, yeah, go ahead.
So on the example that I use, I have a view, but tell me if I'm right. My view is the OpenAI, let's use them as an example. They would want as much data as possible, and whatever I give them, they will ingest happily. And that my job as the user, make it now Costco rather than bank, is to limit what I give them, as like you said, to kind of protect my private data or my data and so on. Is that even true, or will they be the one protecting me and say, don't give us this data, we don't want it, or they will help me? Or so do I have to have the best lawyer like you on my side, or the industry is already kind of settled so that they would tell me, don't give us this, give us that, and so on?
No, you need a good lawyer on your side. And the problem's a business problem, which is because people haven't really figured out yet how to what's the perfect one or two ways to monetize AI. And we we also don't know what a user's acceptance of an AI product is. So is it that they ask a chatbot a question and then they get a response and they receive some kind of like minimal level of happy feeling? If they use a chatbot for code or business, is it that the result meets some predefined like criteria? So because the actual results are still up in the air and the business models are still up in the air, that means that people's training policies are going to change basically every week. And from my experience, all the companies are going to ask to train on your data in a much more broad way than they need because they don't know what they need. What they want is to take as much as they can from you right now so that they can get that slight edge when they've figured out a good product market fit and then just like zoom. But people follow the law, but AI companies are not companies that, especially really, really small ones, they're not especially concerned with regulatory compliance. So just like you wouldn't contract with a small vendor and then feel safe giving all your customer and all your personal data to them, you need to exercise the same suspicion as you would. And there's an easy solution to a lot of this, which is just practice with self-hosted open source models. Because open source models really are starting to, if they're not already, competitive with some of the best models. And there you can completely shut down the ability for other people to gather data from you. And you can prototype and use customer data in a way that you can control. So I think open source, that'd be the, instead of any legal advice, I would just say, wait a minute, have you considered open source models? Because that might take away a lot of this.
So I'm going to ask you that in a second about the pros and cons of that, or what are the choices people have to make. One more question that I have to just as a counsel to a lot of those companies. So I'm this Costco company that we made up for a second, and I'm partnering with OpenAI, and I have a lawyer that does things. My understanding as a lay kind of is that the lawyers are not trained in AI, and they might not know what to do and so on. So I can hire a service from the outside to help me. What is your experience in a company? How does it work? Like the legal team gets the tech team to be their advisors, and together they do it. They just get trained on AI and become expert at that. They hire a third party. How does a company that isn't an AI company but wants to do AI deals with the need to have a contract without knowing enough about it?
Yeah, they have to learn, and we have to hold all our legal teams accountable to learning. So you mentioned Google. Reading a lot of open source licenses and trying to determine open source policy. If you look at the open source licenses, they use the words like compilation, object code. So you need to know how to code if you're going to interpret what a software license is. Like likewise, you need to understand how AI works if you're going to give legal advice about what to do with models. So that can, yeah, that burden's going to be on lawyers and policy professionals to understand what is going on.
How do you learn? So it's not the same type of kind of knowledge. Like the computer scientists go take how does a lawyer who is trained in law get kind of good at that? What's your particular answer?
There's no shortcut. So when I learned to code, that was the only way. And I started contributing to open source projects. And for AI, I've trained my own models. I've tried to create my own workflows. There's no substitute for really learning. And so few people, unfortunately, in my experience, actually try to do the hard work of learning, that the people in the field that know what they're talking about, there's few of them, and they get all the work and are the only trusted advisors. There's just no shortcut. You just have to go do it yourself.
Okay, perfect. So when we started, I kind of alluded to the fact that there's a lot of like tension between companies, and I think the most visible ones are lawsuits between OpenAI and New York Times. Kind of like this, you're in the kind of heart of another one. Tell me the behind the scenes of those things. Who's going to win? What are they arguing about? How does it work when, on the one hand, OpenAI sues New York Times, but also their partners on version 2 and they pay them? Like, how do you see it play out? Like, how it's going to land?
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes back to the business model problem. If the economics of how to monetize AI were already figured out, there wouldn't be all these lawsuits. So just stepping back a second and being maybe a little more vibey, a little more hand wavy. In my view, these lawsuits are based on, one, as I said, the I think correct fear that AI is going to come and replace people's jobs. There's also the idea that anytime a new market is opened up, people want a piece of that market too. So like New York Times had no idea about making they had no concept of making a chatbot. That was never going to be the use for their material. And yet when someone else opened up a new market, they saw that there was so much money there. So just the differential in money and the lack of a clearly established business plan is going to create a lawsuit. Going back to the actual law though, and just trying to be specific, we have to distinguish between what are the implications of training a model on people's data? And then what are the outputs that that model produces? What is really settled law now, today, is that merely training a model on data is a transformative use of that copyright protected expression. And the reason that that's the case is, it goes all the way back to our Constitution. Our Constitution said people can get limited monopolies on copyright and patent as long as that advanced science and the progress of the arts, right? So inherent in that constitutional imperative to create intellectual property laws is the idea that what we were seeking to do is incentivize people to do a lot of creative stuff by protecting expression. So, but what we weren't trying to do is to prevent people from expressing ideas or doing speech or using that creative expression in a way that was completely transformative. Because if we were going to do that, then we'd accidentally grant a monopoly on ideas, which was not the whole point. So that's a long-winded way of saying there's decades and decades of legal precedent, centuries of legal precedent around this, as well as the constitutional imperative that training is almost certainly going to be considered fair use. But then the outputs, there's also really well settled law that if you make an output that is substantially similar to another person's copyrighted work, that's infringement. And you need to figure out how to deal with that. So if the parties right now had figured an efficient way to do royalties, there would be no lawsuits because money would just take care of it. The problem is that unlike taking a snippet of someone's song or taking a snippet of someone's movie and putting it in my movie, okay, I can look at the original work. I see this is the market. This is the market for mine. I'll give you not all of it, but some of the revenue from my work. That makes sense. When you train a model, you might train a model on billions of images. So the actual economic impact of any one specific input is zero. And there's just really not yet a clean way to make a royalty scheme around that. And so I think that is going to lead to very messy lawsuits, very unpredictable outcomes in IP law. So I guess my advice for business leaders is be prepared to navigate extreme uncertainty around this topic for the next 2 or 3 years. Consider maximizing litigation insurance. Make sure that the products you put out there are going to generate a lot of revenue because the juice has to be worth the squeeze. If you're going to face that much legal uncertainty, you shouldn't do it just because you feel compelled by the market to do something with AI. You should really be prepared to put out a product where you're going to be the best company at that product. And there's a clear demand for that thing. And there's enough revenue that if you go back, you can justify spending 10 or 15% of that revenue on.
So let's go to Midjourney. You're the counsel for Midjourney. Midjourney is in a similar battle right now. I don't even know the story fully. Midjourney is being sued by whom?
Right now, Midjourney is facing a lawsuit by artists who drew images, put them on the internet, and said they did not want machine learning models trained on those images.
And part of the billions of images are those artist data. And if I'm a user, can I ask Midjourney to essentially make me a picture that is in the style of this artist or that is a replica of this one? That's the kind of question that is on the line. And is Midjourney responsible or me? Is that kind of correct description of the
yes, that's the basic. Yeah, that's exactly that. Yeah, and it's important to say too, style is not protectable by any. So style is more of an idea. What copyright law protects is specific expression. Sometimes there can be a little bit of uncertainty between the connection between someone's like artistic style and being substantially similar to a work they produced. But those are two separate things. Yeah,
I got this discussion. I'm a user, and I say to Midjourney, make me a picture that looks exactly like this. Okay, and I get a similar one. Am I now in the realm of copyright infringement, or just because there you said it easy infringement? It's easy. If I make a copy of something, then I just intended to. But if it comes, it becomes a question that Midjourney is responsible or not. That's the question basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So potentially, and so I think you kind of like alluded to this a little earlier with the customer indemnification. Part of building a product, if you figure out, is this a consumer product? Is this a B2B product? Is figuring out all the rivers of potential liability and trying to figure out who should bear the risk and who should take that liability. So, for example, a user could go on Midjourney and generate a picture of Starbucks, or maybe not the exact logo, but something green with a mermaid. Then they could say, plaster the word Starbucks on it and start selling T-shirts. Now, in that case, we have Section 230 and other platform liability safe harbors. The user is taking something with that output and doing something extra that might violate, in that case, that might be trademark infringement. Now, that'd be separate from, for example, if we were pushing users to or incentivizing people directly to break the law, then the liability should be with us. But as you design, that's part of product design too. Is like, first, is it a good product? Are you actually doing something with AI where you're the best, you're the prettiest at it, you're the fastest at it, you have a cost advantage, you're the smartest at it. So you have to have a product that customers really want. And then you can start fiddling around with, okay, well, here are all the flows of potential liability, kind of like do an actuarial table of a probability distribution of different outcomes. You assign different weights to it. And this is, I'm just starting to allude to a more, I guess, quantitative way of pricing risk out and figuring out how to navigate around legal uncertainty. But again, really doesn't matter if your product's not making revenue. Okay. It's probably just easier to just take the product away.
So the two big lawsuits are the one that you're involved with, protecting Midjourney. The one OpenAI is attacked by New York Times. And so artist is one, content creators in text are the other. Those are two major lawsuits. First of all, when do you think we're going to have an answer? And you think it's going to be a kind of verdict, or they're going to settle somewhere?
I don't think any party is going to settle, because I think that these are existential questions for everyone involved. I think that, so they're just at the district court level. So we still have like a year or two for them to go to the appellate level and then to go to the Supreme Court. I believe at the end of the day, training is going to remain fair use, and that outputs that are infringing are going to be subject to the existing law. So my personal view is like very institutionalist, stable, that if you look at our existing law, it actually really addresses all these concepts very clearly. The potential confusion is that the executive branch has declared that AI is a strategic national priority. We're in competition with China to make the best AI programs we can make. And so I think that when there's so much money at risk, it's hard to just give a classic legal explanation. Sometimes people engage in motivated reasoning. It might just be a big fight between the legislative branch and the executive branch and businesses, and they might predetermine how they think a fair allocation of revenues and royalties goes to advance their priorities, and then everyone's going to just work to back solve some kind of legal answer to that, and then claim, oh, well, this was obvious, but it's not obvious at all. So when there's so much money involved, you can really only kind of guess and provide what the answer would be today if the law didn't change.
Here's another question that in the class of threat AI, there's one part where we talk about the somewhat of like a small community of developers who basically run the entire world. So we say like Reid Hoffman invests in Microsoft, but also in Mistral, and Microsoft owns part of OpenAI, and OpenAI competes with Inflection, but Inflection also was high. Like when you look at this kind of entire landscape, ends up much smaller than it. Is it the same for the legal side? Like you guys all know each other, you know the lawyer from OpenAI, you get it, like when they are in a lawsuit against New York Times and you're in like the artist, you kind of have the same, like is it like a small community, or everyone its own independent and it's not really as shared as I imagine?
Yeah, it's a small community, but I would say that we're constantly in a state of co-opetition. So there are certain things that take Section 230 liability, for example. That is something that any platform owner is going to largely be in agreement with, because there's really no scenario where a big platform that has millions of pieces of user content can take any liability for what their users do. They would just die. So that's an area where there's like a lot of agreement. But we also have extreme policy disagreements, in part because everyone's still figuring out how to make money off of AI. And actually, like, people are losing money hand over fist. And yeah, as the business models and the revenue streams begin to make more sense, I think there might be more alignment on what the industry position is now. So I'd say co-opetition. But yeah, it's a small, friendly group of lawyers, not that many.
There's one more kind of, I don't know what to call it, like a superstition I have about legal,
Yeah.
and you might dispel it for me or tell me if it's true. My kind of image is that the innovators in OpenAI come up with great ideas that they are going to push the boundaries, and the legal says, no, you can't do that, it's going to be a problem. That legal are kind of the risk assessor and the barrier. Is that true generally, maybe? But more so, is it relevant in the world of AI, where companies need to work very, very fast, where you need to push the boundaries, where OpenAI releases things before they're kind of even complete, and Facebook really kind of tries things that are half-baked, and as a policy, is the job of lawyers in tech companies very different? And how does it navigate when you think that something is a risk, but the tech people want to do it?
Yeah. So I think that, yeah, the idea of a lawyer is just like someone who says no or blocks something. That's a bad lawyer. That's not the point of a lawyer. I think there's a couple of like definitions of what I think an effective lawyer in this space would be. One would be listening to the business and trying to help them achieve their dreams in a reasonable way. But I think the more empirical way is as a more lawyer as an actuary. So what you do is like you collect all these probability tables of outcomes. So first, tell me how much money you think your product's going to generate for the company. Okay, you think 50% this, 50%. So our expected gain is this. So now I'm going to stop a second and I'm going to tell you, here are things you can't do because it would just be criminal. So we're not going to do criminal things. Here's all the uncertainty about the civil things. Here's the probability we get sued over here. Here's your maximum damages here. You basically, the best thing a lawyer in this space can do is create tables. So it's not precise enough to say, oh, there's risk, there's risk. There's always risk in everything. You have to just live your life and do business. Instead, what I try to provide and what the people that I work with try to provide are comparators. So to say, okay, if you take this action, you might make revenue, but it's possible that 20% of that revenue, before you even take a margin, is going to be tied up in legal bills. Is this the way you want to go? And by the way, if we just restructure this and that, we can bring that number down to 10%. So I look at legal more as like actuarial, and then more as an engineering task. It's never to say just no or yes. It's to really understand what the client goals are and then help engineer a liability and product structure that matches the business desires as much as possible, but makes the most money while minimizing liability.
I see as a kind of viewer of those things, a lot of hearings from Congress where they bring the CEOs of those companies to Congress and either kind of seem to admire them or kind of hammer at them some kind of so on. How do you prepare for that as a counsel to those companies who go in so on? And I think that what's your view on our Congress in terms of like understanding of the law and kind of being innovative in like setting laws and so on? In a way, the law is set by them, not by your companies. Are we in good shape, not good shape? Are they bad, good? What do you think?
It's you always want a specialized team to prep you if you're going to go in front of Congress. It's really hard to get a good outcome there. You're almost set up to fail in that way. I don't like failing publicly or setting my clients up to fail publicly. Kind of want to make so honestly, in this case, the first thing we would do is try to get out of it. In terms of where Congress's priorities are right now, I think many members of Congress do understand. They do have a nuanced view both of the law, IP law, and they see the same briefings everyone else does about like the rise of automation. They understand that we have this tension between we want to keep maximum employment and have a stable society. We want to benefit from the gains of AI. We don't want to go to this dystopia where there's massive unemployment and massive draw on benefits programs because AI has replaced all the jobs. And we haven't thought of like a reasonable substitute like universal basic income. I think the problem is, though, like any problem, there's just not agreement on the solutions. And sometimes there's not yeah, I'd say right now there's not agreement on the solutions, but pretty much everyone does understand the risks and the way it could go.
And when you talk about the risks, I think that AI forces many companies to think globally, right? Like, so one thing is like Congress in the US has this thing, but like many big companies, Midjourney is no different. There's Chinese competitors, there's European competitors, there's now Saudi Arabian competitors. And so those companies, do they have different policies for different countries, or you just kind of say the US is going to set the rules and kind of you guys kind of, how do you think about when you get asked about what would be Journey's product in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, it's a great question. The shortcut that I follow and that many other lawyers follow is to look at the countries that so far have been most effective at exporting their laws to others. So the concept to think about is this concept of a market for laws. When you talk about the global context, it's not just like, okay, you have to follow the laws in every country. You get to decide where you put your business, and you can put different units of your business in different countries. So countries are competing both with their markets and with their legal regimes. Short answer on that is probably just I would look to California and Europe. So if you look at the GDPR rollout, Europe had such a thoughtful and integrated understanding of how privacy law should work that many other countries just copied it. And they did that because of this international jurisdictional competition. Like everyone's seeking to provide laws to attract capital to their specific country. So we look at the influencers basically. And when it comes to AI regulation, I'd say for the next 2 to 5 years, I would keep following Europe. I'd follow the EU AI Act. Not because, one, because I'm concerned and would want to make sure that you can operate compliantly in Europe, but more importantly, because they're right now the leading voice on what a coherent next generation framework might look like. And the things that they're starting to suggest would really disturb current business practices on training, opt-outs, data gathering, on a bunch of different axes. So I would look at that as the best guess for what it would be in the next couple of years.
2 last questions. One gossip, one personal. The gossip one of the elements of legal that I think is kind of in the public eye is lawsuits that are very personal, like Elon Musk suing Sam Altman, the board of OpenAI fires, like all of those kind of very, is that something that lawyers kind of equipped to deal with? Like it's not really a lawsuit, right? It's like this guy hates this guy. They're trying to find ways, but it's more than just a lawsuit. It's also personal. It's also a legal battle that happens on Twitter. It's a legal battle that happens by you trying to kind of convince the president to attack my son. How do you, if you want to, how do you deal with that? Like it's not really about the litigation in trial. It's really about like when do you put a tweet on the right in the right moment?
Yeah. No, I think it's fundamental to being a lawyer. So as you said, I run a boutique law firm that just fractional general counsel for small startups in AI. And thankfully, lately, things have been good. But honestly, like first 5-10 clients they'd come to the same, they'd start with the same question. Can you help us write our terms of service? Sure, we'll do that. And I got into a really big fight with my co-founder, and we're not talking anymore. Help me kick them off. Or my investors are being very inappropriate. Some kind. There's always some kind of like interpersonal problem because business is full of people doing personal things. So there's I disagree with the like dry view of the law, and I actually think that it's mostly what you suggested, which is people have interpersonal problems and they mix their own desires with the goals of the business. So you have to be sensitive to that. But I think a good lawyer will do is try to help a client calm down and separate their desire to make money, which belongs inside the business, from their personal grievances and like interpersonal fights. As much as possible, those should be separate from the business because lawsuits are so annoying. They take several years. They're an emotional drain. Those are years you can't get back from your life. So although like I'm equipped to fight, everyone's equipped to fight, you want to pick battles and you want to really make sure that you're not acting out of spite or revenge or pride, which are all reasonable and common ways to do something. But as much as possible, if you're acting for a company, please at least try to make it about making money and not about personal grievance.
You're basically a divorce lawyer for AI companies.
I mean, yeah. Sometimes.
Okay, here's my last one, a little bit personal. I'm curious. There are those kind of rumors, not true. It's like a kind of anecdotes about attorneys showing up to court with like made up legal because they use the GPT of sort to write a kind of a thing and they get to lose the job. How do you use Midjourney, OpenAI in the legal space? Do you write stuff with it? Everything is done by human. You read it for like you get summaries. Like how do you actually use as a personal tool those things?
Yeah. So I'm really interested in. All right, like let me say it this way. When you code, when you write software, you can take one approach, which is, all right, I'm just going to prompt, hey, write me a website, write me this. Then you look at it, is it okay? Is it not okay? But the more, I think, adult and sustainable and scalable way to use AI to write software is you create unit tests. You have these other little mini programs that have black and white verifications like, okay, here's the behavior that the program has. And I know that any program that I put in this, I'll either get a yes or no. And then when you go to prompt or vibe code, you get some software out, but it passes through these checks. And that's what I'm most interested in when it comes to using AI for law or for legal or business reasoning is analogous to how if you really start writing unit tests in code, you eventually see that the implementation code doesn't really matter anymore because you could erase it all and replicate the system functionality quickly just with the unit tests. We need unit tests for law. So like a unit test for law would be, do you remember why you got into this contract? What is your business goal for getting into this? How much do you trust the other party? Are there times that you fought with them? For me, for my practice, eliciting and storing narratives about how people felt and what people wanted are the things that really structure the contract. The contract is just like some random language implementation that's supposed to explain what people wanted and how they felt. And so that to me is like the most exciting application. And I've used it in that way is to extract and store narratives so that we make sure, okay, in a year, a big deal is going to come up for renewal. Well, why did we put the indemnity like this? Why did we put the payment terms like this? It's because we didn't trust this counterparty. They were late a couple times. Or we're giving them special grace because we think we're going to get 10 times that much business from them in a year if we keep it going, if we keep growing. So yeah, the thing I would never recommend someone do though is just like create a legal brief using AI. That is, for one, the reason you can't just give up your ability to think to an AI system, at least right now, is because, so when I say something, you can argue with me. You can test my beliefs like on an interpersonal level. And, we could send something to a human editor. There is no really way to document and test the beliefs of the things that AI systems generate. So I think I want to see more knowledge graph type solutions. I want to see more automated programs to check implications of things. And I think we're still really new in that. But yeah, that's a long-winded. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Max. Very, very helpful. I'm gonna take a few kind of quotes from you that come in my class.
Please.
I'm gonna claim back the screen and show everyone the last two slides of our plan. Wait, where is this? And with those, we're gonna finish the session today. Research, winners and losers, and a prediction. One research that came out that I thought would be interesting for the people who are with us to know about is something that we call the chatbot arena. It's a new type of benchmark where you can basically submit prompts, and this arena tries them across all models, ranks them, and basically creates a leaderboard. So it took all the prompts right now from January 2024 to April 2025 and create 2 million type of battles, which is run by all 42 leading providers with overall 250 AI models, ChatGPT, ChatGPT-4, Anthropic Claude, Anthropic Mini, and so on. All of those were run, including some that are not even released or open source models. And it basically tries to kind of say what the best AI models are in a relatively well. I wrote a note that one paper indicates that the arena itself is not reliable, so it might not be a tool that people would rely on heavily so far, but it becomes like this kind of really good, interesting kind of way to test which one is the best model out there. And one thing that this already revealed, the Chatbot Arena, is that many AI companies are not really training AIs, they're just training memory tools, meaning they just have all the text in the world, if you want, in the training data. And for whatever question you ask, they're not really building new answer. They're kind of taking some canned answer that they have there and just changing a few words here and there. So essentially, what we call overfitting is apparently much bigger in the world of AI than the AI companies claim. Another research I thought was interesting is something called pre-code reasoner. Reasoners, if you remember, are the better version of most of the chatbots because they answer questions very, very fast, similar to the previous arena that said that a lot of questions are already asked again and again. What the pre-code basically does is it looks at questions that already were asked by people, and it remembers the question and the answer, and it gives user 2 the answer to user 1 if it's already repeating the same question. But more than that, it's just trying to hallucinate questions. So when there's nighttime in, say, Silicon Valley, and no prompts are coming in, the precog tries to just make up questions and answer them and save the question and the answer in the prediction that at some point someone's going to ask the same question that was already pre-cogged before and give it. So precog are basically trying to predict what we're going to ask AIs and give the answers. This was shown to reduce significantly the amount of effort because it kind of balances when questions are coming, when answers are coming, and then when the questions can come, there's a load of answers, you can just send a prepared one. So it kind of makes the load on the reasoner computers much faster. Winners and losers of AI. I say the biggest 4 winners of the last 3 months are China, Anthropic, AI, XAI, and DeepMind. Let me explain. China, who was seen as like 5 years behind on AI, has now multiple companies that seem to be equal or sometimes even better in their models. In video, they seem to be better than some companies. In the language model, in English, they seem to be as good as many of the American AI companies. China, that seemed to be behind, is now ahead. Anthropic, which was always seen as number 2 on sales and on innovation, now have more innovation in the last 3 months than OpenAI, which is regarded number 1, and it also shows in the number of users. They quickly climb up in number of users, and they're still number 2 in the number of users and the amount of money, but the numbers were 10 order of magnitude smaller than OpenAI, and now it's less than that. XAI, another winner. Last time, if you remember, they were the losers because their efforts didn't materialize into them having a good model. Now they have equal model to all of them. So those are the 3 big winners in kind of geopolitics and in tech. When it comes to research, DeepMind is still always the leader. They, again, are not having a strong business kind of use, but they released in the last 3 months papers after papers that published in the highest profile journals that solve problems that are notoriously unsolvable. Namely, they have a paper in a journal called Nature, that's the highest profile journal in science just last 3 months ago, where they predict the weather. This is something that, other than saying that the day after is going to be similar to the day before in weather and trying to look at all kinds of indicators and predicting things like rain and heat and change, it's really, really hard to do it in large scale and big and longer horizons. So to say today what will be the weather in New York in 2 weeks is a nearly impossible task. And apparently DeepMind has a model that does a really good job in predicting weather quite far in the future. The losers are OpenAI and NVIDIA, namely. OpenAI and NVIDIA both lost users, lost money, lost stock in this case. I'm saying in asterisk it's relative because they're still the leaders in any feed, but the fact that there's competitors for NVIDIA, the fact that OpenAI loses business to other competitors and no longer are the leaders in innovation, puts them in the losing side of this one. Privacy laws and regulation are being challenged significantly. So if you gamble on those, there's quite a challenge from regulators. I think that Max mentioned California and Europe as pioneers on this one, but I would say that there's kind of more and more look by organizations on that one. And the H1 export laws that was preventing NVIDIA from selling the H100 to other countries are in question right now because the administration tries to balance the ability to make more money with restrictions on regulation and seems to be impacting the export laws. Hollywood, I would say, a big loser of the last couple of months with video models becoming extremely popular, and with the introduction by companies like Midjourney and DALL-E and Firefly from Adobe of tools that allow you to not just create pictures perfectly, but also pictures are consistent. You can actually make a full movie with the same characters and make sure that they wear the same clothes and have the same expression, that you can actually edit out of a movie some elements using AI, means that Hollywood's studios are going to transition more and more to using AI for a lot of things that would be done before by actors and by producers. And this becomes a big kind of losing thing to the people who create content in Hollywood. Of course, the studios are going to reap all the benefits. Okay, predictions, the favorite part for most people. We had quite a success in predictions from the last time. We mentioned that the NVIDIA stock's going to drop, the China is going to have a comeback, that's going to be a shift to small language models. I told you about the the distributed model, like cryptocurrency, that's a new one, that there are going to be new entrants to the AI landscape, and boy, there are many that are kind of on par with everyone else, that the diffusion is going to change. That's the algorithm that allows you to create images, like I said before, is going to emerge. And indeed, there's a new algorithm for diffusion that does a good job. And that hyperintelligence is still, for the last 3 months, won't be a leader one. It's still the case. And that Musk and OpenAI battle is going to escalate, still the case. I thought wrong that there's going to be a lawsuit between Microsoft and OpenAI. I keep saying that at some point this relationship is going to break and lead to a very, very hostile interaction. Not happening. This doesn't happen. I also thought that because Elon Musk has the ears of the president and the Department of Justice, that OpenAI is going to suffer from some legal inquiry that's going to be targeted at them. And this doesn't really seem to happen, not bigger than what happened before. AMD, I thought it's going to have a comeback, and apparently they're still not entering the GPU space as a leader. That we're going to see organic processing not happening, and that agents are going to dominate the AI use case. I think that they're definitely getting a lot of love from the world, but still very, very minor. You don't see a lot of agents implemented by most companies. It's still mostly classical chatbots that write things. Predictions for the next 3 months. First of all, China is going to be back in the game, and it's going to start winning contracts in the US. So up to now, China is very, very good in creating models, but they're still not getting business. They're unable to sell in the same way that the US created very, very many restrictions on DeepSeek actually making money from American customers. They did the same thing for other Chinese companies. This is changing right now. And I think that China is going to start making money from AI in the US, which will be a game changer in the next 3 months in the business side. The US, I think, will launch its first regulation and true export control in response to those things that will restrict users from, say, buying some Chinese vendors' AI tools, I think are going to be for the first time on the menu in the US. Anthropic said that the only thing that will stop China from taking over our export controls. And I think that this will launch a clash between AI hardware and software companies. The software companies don't suffer from the export controls as much as the hardware companies. So NVIDIA wants one thing that OpenAI does not want. And I think this will create a friction between OpenAI and NVIDIA, who have different interests in this one. Immigration laws are going to be, I think, changed for AI engineers. Right now, the US tries to basically get rid of a lot of people that are here illegally. I think that when they realize that many of the people who are illegally are people who work in AI companies as engineers and not just people who do labor work that are easier to supposedly deport, it's going to create some kind of sub-clause to you deport these people, but not these people because they are actually valuable for our economy. We're going to have the first attack on data cluster, cyber attack on data cluster, because the world realizes that that's where the money is. There's more and more unsuccessful attack that didn't materialize, but I think that we're going to have in the next 3 months the first one that will materialize, and will teach people that actually those are a vulnerable asset that we need to protect differently. Because of the tool that Trump is doing right now in the Middle East, we're going to have the first data cluster by AI companies in Silicon Valley that's set in Middle East. So it will be OpenAI's data cluster in Qatar or Saudi Arabia, which will essentially open American companies to more Middle Eastern companies and vice versa. It will be revealed that the mineral deals between Ukraine and the US is actually going to be partially an AI deal. We already have indicators that this might be the case, but right now it seems that it's mostly about minerals per se. But as we kind of unfold more and more, it will become clear that AI companies were behind some of those deals, pushing for it because they get some of the benefits of the energy that comes with that. I predict that we're going to have the first armed conflict that has to do with AI. I think it's already happened. I think there's rumors that Israel uses AI technology in the Israel-Palestine war in Gaza, but not verified yet. But I think between the India-Pakistan war, US offense actions, and Israel offense, we're going to see that basically it was the first attack conflict that AI was spearheading and controlling. Again, I'm going to still argue, but stick to it, that there's going to be a friction between OpenAI and Microsoft, that the tariffs that kind of are leveraged by all kinds of countries now in response to the US tariffs will separate AI because everyone realizes that this is something that you make money out of and you don't want to meddle with. I still hold that most Fortune 500 companies are going to have a person with the title Chief AI Officer. NVIDIA stock is going to keep dropping in the next 3 months because of the Huawei competition. And we're going to have the first energy crisis that has to do with the AI data center. As in summer is coming in the US, there are more and more cities that already have challenges of power. Now that AI data clusters are taking some of the power, we're going to have an outage in Memphis, Tennessee, that when they investigate will turn out to be an outage that impacted people, but the data center was working perfectly. So it's going to create the first kind of summer where AI data centers are going to friction with human AC. And given that there's an effort by the Musk Doge organization to get rid of a lot of federal agencies that they deem useless, I think that right now this seems to be the trajectory that we're going. There're going to be more and more replacement of the agency work by AI. So the Musk group will say we don't need FEMA because it's a wasting money entity, but we do need the thing that FEMA gives us, which protections against hurricanes and natural disasters. We're going to move those to technology rather than to humans. Those are my predictions for the next 3 months. We spoke about a prediction, and I'll see all of you in 3 months. It says February 15. I think it's supposed to be August 14. We're going to see all of you August 14 for the next update. Thank you very much for spending the last 1.5 hours with me.